After my husband's funeral, my daughter drove me to a quiet country road and said, "This is where you get off." No goodbye, no hug, just a suitcase and a cold dismissal from the family I thought I raised with love. As her car vanished in a cloud of dust, I stood alone with no phone, no money, but with one secret that would change everything. She thought she had taken everything. She thought I was too old, too weak to fight back. But she didn't know who I was before I became their mother. She didn't know what I had hidden or what I was about to do. You see, betrayal doesn't break you. It awakens you. And the road she left me on, it's not the end. It's the beginning. The story I'm about to tell you isn't about revenge. It's about justice. And it begins with a lie. I always imagined the end would be quieter, softer. Not this empty, hollow ache echoing in my chest as we lowered the only man who ever truly understood me into the earth. Jonathan was a simple man, kind, patient, stubborn as an old oak. He never asked for much, never needed recognition, but he saw me, all of me. The long hours I poured into our family nursery, the sleepless nights balancing invoices, keeping our home warm, meals ready, bills paid. He never let me feel invisible. Even when the children grew up and forgot what it took to build the life they so easily inherited, Jonathan always thanked me, always made sure I knew he saw the sweat behind the comfort. But now, the one person who valued my sacrifices was gone. The last thread tethering me to a life of meaning snapped. The funeral was held in the small church where we had exchanged vows 42 years ago. The same pastor, the same choir, older but still singing with that trembling honesty only age can give. I wore the navy dress Jonathan always loved, the one he said brought out the steel in my eyes. Our children stood beside me, Emily, with her polished smile and perfectly pressed black coat, and Adam, who flew in from wherever his latest business opportunity had collapsed. They both looked like actors in a play, like mourners in costume. They stood solemnly, nodded at the right words, cried the correct number of tears, but I didn't feel them mourning their father. I felt them performing, already watching the clock, planning what came next. I barely heard the eulogy. I just kept staring at the casket, willing it to lift, to tell me this was a mistake. But when the dirt hit the wood with that awful final sound, I knew it was real. Jonathan was truly gone, and with him, any buffer between me and the children's ambition. After the burial, Emily slipped her arm through mine. Her voice was sugar. "Come on, Mom, let's get you home." I nodded, too exhausted to argue. She led me to her car, sleek, expensive, with the smell of leather and the coldness of steel. I sank into the seat, clutching my purse like a life raft. "You'll stay with us for a few days," she said as she started the engine. "It's time you got some rest. Let us handle things now." That sounded kind, reasonable even, but something in her tone made me uneasy. We drove in silence, the countryside blurring past in soft spring hues, fields dotted with sheep, old barns leaning like tired men. I closed my eyes, trying to imagine what Jonathan would say. Probably something like, "Rest now, Eve. You've carried enough." Then the car slowed. I opened my eyes to see a narrow gravel road, the kind that leads nowhere in particular. Emily pulled over beside a wildflower field. There were no houses, no signs, just wind and grass and the chirping of unseen birds. "This is where you get off," she said. I blinked. "What?" She turned toward me, face calm. "The house is ours now. The business too. We just can't take care of you, Mom. You'll figure it out." I stared at her, waiting for the punchline, but there was none. "Emily," I said, voice low, "this isn't funny." She opened the glove box and pulled out a small suitcase. My suitcase. "You have your essentials," she said. "There's a gas station about 2 miles up the road. I'm sure you can call someone from there." I tried the door. Locked. "Let me out." She pressed the unlock button without a word. The click of the lock was louder than the engine. I stepped out. The wind caught my hair, tugged at my coat. Emily placed the suitcase on the ground beside me. Then she got back in, rolled down the window. "This is for the best. We need to move on. You'll be fine." And with that, she drove away. Just like that. No phone, no money, just an old woman and a dusty road. I stood frozen, the suitcase handle digging into my palm, watching her taillights disappear over the hill. The air smelled of lilacs and betrayal, but after a long minute, something shifted inside me. Not fear, not despair, clarity. I wasn't lost. I was free. The car vanished down the road, leaving a fading cloud of dust and silence. The kind of silence that doesn't soothe, but swallows. Evelyn stood alone on the gravel, suitcase in one hand, purse clutched in the other. The cold spring wind brushed against her skin, lifting strands of her silver hair across her face. For a long moment, she didn't move. Couldn't. Her legs, once so used to walking rows of flowers and hauling soil bags, felt like stone. The words echoed louder, now that the engine was gone. "This is where you get off." It wasn't a suggestion. It wasn't grief. It was exile. She blinked, half expecting to wake up from this twisted hallucination, half expecting Jonathan's hand to rest gently on her shoulder and pull her away from this nightmare. But Jonathan was 6 feet under, and Evelyn was alone. She took a shaky breath and slowly lowered herself onto a flat rock by the roadside. Her suitcase leaned against her knee like a confused pet. She opened it, half hoping for a note, some explanation. But no, just the essentials. A sweater, nightgown, her cholesterol medication, toothbrush, no phone, no wallet, no love. Shock was a strange thing. It didn't always arrive as tears or gasps. Sometimes it was quiet, still, like a hollow bell waiting to ring. A single car passed in the distance but didn't stop. Why would it? To them, she was just an old woman resting beside the road, not a mother abandoned by her own child, not the co-founder of a family business, not a human being with decades of sacrifice stitched into her spine. Evelyn's fingers trembled, not from cold, but from memory. They didn't even ask, didn't even let her pack her own bag, just decided she was disposable. Her gaze drifted to the wildflowers swaying in the ditch nearby. Purple thistles, dandelions, yellow sorrel. Nature reclaiming a road nobody cared to pave. The kind of wild, stubborn beauty she and Jonathan had fallen in love with decades ago. Greenfield County had been little more than farmland and forest when they first arrived in the early 80s. Newlyweds with nothing but a beat-up pickup and an idea. People want to grow things. Let's help them. Evelyn smiled faintly. She could still picture the first greenhouse, bare bones, hand-built by Jonathan with salvaged wood and rusty nails. It leaked, it creaked, but it bloomed. With every flower that rooted, every seedling sold at the weekend market, their dream grew sturdier. They worked like mules, 16-hour days, rain or shine. She handled the books, managed suppliers, created flyers with handwritten phone numbers. He cultivated, taught customers how to care for their plants, repaired everything that broke. Emily was born in that chaos, swaddled in blankets beside cash registers and tomato trays. Adam came 2 years later, always chasing butterflies through garden rows. How did we get here? How did those children, the ones she nursed with cracked hands and sang to during thunderstorms, become people who could leave her on a roadside like an unwanted item? Another gust of wind pulled Evelyn from the memory. She looked down at her purse still tight under her arm. Unlike the suitcase, she had packed this one herself. She unzipped the inner lining slowly. Her fingers brushed paper, thick, crisp, official. They think I'm helpless. Evelyn pulled out the small envelope sealed in wax. It bore no label, but she didn't need one. She had carried it with her ever since Jonathan got sick. It held a copy of a land title, 5 acres separate from the main nursery property. Purchased years ago in her maiden name, back when they thought of expanding. That land contained the original greenhouse, the main well, and the access road that any future development would require. Without it, nothing could be legally built or sold. They had no idea. The business, registered under Jonathan's name for tax purposes, might have been technically passed on to the children. But this deed, this quiet sliver of land, this was her ace. Not because she was spiteful, but because she knew the game. And because she knew her children better than they thought. They didn't see her anymore. They saw a liability, but Evelyn wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. She tucked the envelope back into the lining, then pulled out a second item, an old flip phone, prepaid, barely modern enough to text, but it worked. Jonathan had insisted they each keep one in case of real emergencies. Evelyn had rolled her eyes at the time, but hadn't thrown it away. Thank God. She flipped it open. Battery 68%. Enough. She stood, slowly brushing off her skirt, then picked up the suitcase. Her knees ached and her heart throbbed in betrayal, but she was upright. They left me here to disappear. But what they really did was set me free. She turned away from the road and began walking, not toward the gas station her daughter had mentioned, but toward the path through the wildflowers, a back road that led eventually to town. It would take time. Her joints weren't what they used to be, but she had time. She had secrets, and she had a plan. 3 hours. That's how long it took Evelyn to walk back to Greenwood Village. 3 hours under the sharp spring sun, with nothing but the sound of wind and her own thoughts for company. By the time she reached the edge of the village, her feet were screaming, and the suitcase's plastic wheel had cracked on a gravel rut. She ended up dragging it half the way like a tired dog refusing to move. But when the familiar green-painted sign appeared, "Welcome to Greenwood Village, where roots grow deep," Evelyn's steps slowed. She was home, sort of. The town hadn't changed. Children still played near the corner shop, a couple of retirees chatted over coffee outside the diner, and someone was hanging flower baskets under the post office window. But as Evelyn passed by, everything paused. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. One child dropped her ice cream. They weren't staring out of rudeness. They were shocked. Because Mrs. Evelyn Blake, wife of the recently deceased Jonathan Blake, co-founder of Blake's Garden and Nursery, was supposed to be resting in her daughter's guest room in the city, or at least recovering in some nice senior residence, not dragging a broken suitcase through town like a woman who'd been cast out of her own life. Jenny Patterson, granddaughter of the general store owner, was the first to react. "Mrs. Blake?" she whispered, wide-eyed. Evelyn gave her a nod and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Just out for a walk." Jenny immediately dashed into the store and returned seconds later with a bottle of water and a phone. "You need to call someone? Sit down, please. You look like I've been discarded by my own blood," Evelyn offered dryly. Jenny's mouth opened, then closed again. Instead of answering, she helped Evelyn into the store's shaded corner bench and handed over the phone. But Evelyn didn't call her children. She called David Lynn, the family's lawyer for over 2 decades. He was Jonathan's college friend and the only one Evelyn trusted to know the truth and not be swayed by tears or tantrums. "David," she said when he answered, "we need to talk now." 20 minutes later, David's white sedan pulled up in front of the general store. He rushed in, his tie crooked, eyes wide. "Evelyn, thank God. I've been trying to reach you since the funeral." "Emily and Adam didn't think I needed a phone," she said flatly. His lips tightened. "I had questions about the will they submitted." She raised an eyebrow. "You mean the version where I disappear and the garden center turns into a shopping plaza?" He nodded grimly. "That one." He helped her into the car. As they drove through the town toward his office, Evelyn noticed more familiar faces watching from behind curtains or front porches. News travels fast in Greenwood, abandoning your mother faster. Once inside his modest office, with its too warm lighting and the scent of old files, David didn't waste time. "I received a copy of the will from Emily 2 days after the funeral. She claimed it was Jonathan's final revision." "Claimed," Evelyn repeated. "I knew it wasn't," he said simply. "Jonathan and I made updates just 6 months ago. He left the house to you, the business to all three of you, Emily, and Adam, as co-owners, with you holding the deciding vote in any sale or change. And the one she submitted? She removed you completely, left the business to Emily and Adam. No mention of you, not even a monthly stipend. Evelyn's hands curled around the armrests. She timed it, waited until he couldn't argue, until I was too overwhelmed with grief to notice. David handed her a folder. This is the version we filed, notarized, with witnesses. The court already has it, but until I formally contest the new version, the other one is being treated as legitimate. Technically, your children aren't breaking any laws. Yet, she repeated, voice colder now. David leaned forward. Tell me everything that's happened since the funeral. So she did. The conversations, the fake concern, the cheerful car ride that ended in exile, how they didn't even look back, how they probably thought she was at Sunset Pines, knitting with strangers and forgetting how betrayal tastes. When she finished, David's hands were clenched on the desk. I can file an emergency injunction, freeze all transfers, but we'll need evidence that Jonathan was coerced or that the new will is a forgery. Evelyn reached into her purse and pulled out the wax-sealed envelope. She slid it across the desk. What's this? Leverage, she said simply. David broke the seal and examined the deed. His eyebrows shot up. This land includes the well, the original greenhouse. And without access, no developer can build a thing. David's expression shifted from concern to cautious optimism. They don't know about this? They didn't ask. He shook his head. That might be your saving grace. You're not just a grieving widow. You're a legal landowner. They wanted me to disappear, Evelyn said, her voice steady now, but I'm not going anywhere. He sat back, smiling for the first time. Then let's make them wish they hadn't underestimated you. The small office was quiet except for the ticking of the wall clock and the soft rustle of paper as David examined the documents Evelyn had brought. Outside, the world continued like nothing had happened. Children laughed in the park. Birds chirped on the windowsill. But inside, two people were preparing for war. This deed, David said again, tapping his finger on the old parchment, has never been mentioned in any of the business or property filings. That's because I never transferred it, Evelyn replied. Her voice was still hoarse from walking all morning, but it had taken on a steel edge. Jonathan and I agreed decades ago, if things ever got complicated, one of us would need a way to keep control. David looked up. So the 5-acre lot with the original greenhouse, the irrigation system, and the main well still belongs to me, Evelyn confirmed, in my maiden name. Untouched, unlisted. He let out a low whistle. That's the nerve center of the entire business. No greenhouse, no water. The rest of the nursery dies. They wanted to erase me, she said, more to herself than him, but they can't. Not without me signing it over, and that will never happen. David's eyes narrowed as he leaned forward. You do realize, Evelyn, this gives you leverage. Real leverage. I didn't walk 3 hours back to town with blistered feet just to cry, she said, then paused, letting the weight of her words settle. I walked back to fight. He smiled faintly, nodding in approval. All right. First, we'll file an injunction. That stops any sale, any development. Next, I'll notify the probate court that there are conflicting wills. The moment they hear the word fraud, they'll freeze everything. Evelyn sat straighter, hope beginning to crack through the grief in her chest. They're not going to take this lying down, David warned. Expect threats, emotional manipulation, maybe even public shaming. I raised those kids, Evelyn said flatly. There's nothing they can say I haven't heard before. But this time, I won't be guilted into silence. There was a beat of silence between them, the unspoken truth hanging in the air, that Evelyn's children had not only tried to erase her, but do so using her dead husband's signature. That sort of betrayal didn't just hurt, it transformed. David stood and retrieved a file from his cabinet. "Here's what we'll do. I need you to give a written statement about what happened since Jonathan passed. Names, dates, everything." She nodded. "I'll draft the motion to contest the will, and I'll also get in touch with a handwriting expert. If we can prove the signature was forged or manipulated while Jonathan was on medication, their case falls apart." Evelyn clenched her jaw. "They used him when he was too weak to fight back. That signature looked perfect. Too perfect. Jonathan hadn't written a straight line in months." "We'll prove that," David said. "And when we do, you'll take back everything. The business, the house, the respect they tried to bury." Emotion swelled suddenly in Evelyn's chest. Not sadness, not exactly. Something more complicated. It wasn't vengeance either, though that fire burned quietly in her belly. It was belief in herself. For the first time in weeks, maybe months, Evelyn saw a version of her future that didn't end in a dusty retirement home or a rented room above someone else's life. It ended at home, in her garden, with her husband's memory, not her children's greed, guiding the next chapter. She nodded, voice steady again. "I want to be present when we freeze the accounts." David raised a brow. "You planning on marching into the bank?" "I am," she said, "in the same clothes they left me in." He grinned. "Well, if you're going for dramatic effect, I'd recommend we do it tomorrow morning, peak hours. That way half the town sees you." "Good," she said with satisfaction. "Let them whisper." David packed up the deed and slid it into a fireproof envelope. "This goes in the vault. No one gets to see it unless you say so." As Evelyn stood, a new strength settled in her spine. Her knees still ached, her shoulders sagged with age and grief, but her spirit, it had never been sharper. "I'm not fighting to humiliate them," she said at the door. "I know," David replied gently. "I'm fighting because they thought I was nothing, and I need to remind them, and maybe myself, that I'm not." At precisely 7:30 the next morning, Evelyn sat on the worn leather bench outside First Greenwood Bank, watching the staff prepare to open for the day. She wore the same shoes from 2 days ago, dusty, cracked, and scuffed, and a plain blouse over her trousers. Her appearance was deliberate. Let them see her exactly as she was when her children left her on that country road. Inside the bank, Patricia Goldman, the branch manager, saw Evelyn through the glass and hurried to unlock the door. "Mrs. Sullivan," Patricia breathed, taking in Evelyn's weary but defiant expression. "We've been hearing rumors." Evelyn stepped inside without hesitation. "You're about to hear facts. I need to freeze all business and personal accounts under Sullivan's Garden Center and Jonathan Sullivan's name, pending investigation into document fraud." Patricia blinked. "Do you have legal standing?" Evelyn handed her a sealed envelope. "David Chen's court order, filed first thing this morning. You'll find a list of affected accounts and a directive to cooperate fully." As Patricia scanned the documents, her eyebrows arched. "You're serious?" "I was left with nothing," Evelyn said, voice firm. "But they forgot I built this place from scratch. I know every vine, every invoice, and I'm not about to watch it die in the hands of amateurs." Patricia nodded slowly. "We'll comply. I'll notify our legal team." Evelyn turned to leave, but paused. "Oh, and Patricia, check the transaction logs. Look for a $15,000 withdrawal 2 days before my husband's funeral." Patricia's expression darkened. "We'll flag it." By 8:45, Evelyn was seated across from Rebecca Martinez in the cramped office of the Greenwood Weekly. Rebecca had been her friend since their kids played in the sandbox together at the town playground. "They left you where?" Rebecca gasped, pen frozen mid-air. "Maple Grove Road," Evelyn said, sipping her lukewarm tea. "Middle of nowhere. They gave me a suitcase and told me to get out." Rebecca shook her head. "That's not just cruel, it's calculated. It gets worse." Evelyn handed over copies of the forged will and the true deed to the 5 acres. They submitted this to probate court as the legal document. But it's fake. My husband never signed this version. He couldn't even hold a pen. Rebecca scanned the pages, jaw tightening. And the land deed? Never transferred. Still mine. It contains the greenhouse, the irrigation system, and the main well. No developer can build without it. Rebecca exhaled, fire igniting behind her eyes. You want this on the front page? I want it in bold print, Evelyn replied, and I want the town to know exactly what kind of people are trying to destroy what Jonathan and I built. I'll have the story written by lunch, Rebecca promised. We'll run it first thing tomorrow. From there, Evelyn made her next call. To Carlos Rodriguez, the county's environmental compliance officer. Carlos, she said as soon as he picked up, I think it's time we talked about the wetlands on my land. The wetlands? He repeated. You mean the area behind your greenhouse? Yes, she said. There's a reason we never developed it. And I believe the developers Emily's working with are planning to pave right over it. Carlos was quiet then. If what you're saying is true, the Environmental Protection Office will halt that project immediately. Good, Evelyn replied, because I've had enough things stolen from me. By 10:00 a.m., her web of resistance had begun to spread. At 11:15, she made her boldest call yet to the State Agriculture Council. The woman on the other end picked up. State Agriculture Council, this is Karen speaking. Karen, Evelyn said, this is Evelyn Clark Sullivan. I don't know if you remember me, but oh my God, Karen gasped. Are you that Evelyn from the Garden Path Initiative? A pause. Yes, Evelyn said softly. That was me. There was silence on the line. Then, you practically wrote the urban agriculture policy we still use. We've used your case study in 4 states. Evelyn felt her throat tighten. That was a long time ago. Well, ma'am, we'd do anything to help you. What do you need? Evelyn explained everything. The forged will, the fraudulent development deal, and the attempted erasure of her ownership. Karen listened, then said, This isn't just a family issue. This sounds like a coordinated attempt to undermine state-regulated agricultural land. And if that greenhouse is demolished, Evelyn said, the entire supply network for our region will collapse. I'll get this on the governor's desk, Karen said. You'll have our full support. As Evelyn hung up, a memory surfaced. The first meeting room, the folding chairs, the gritty paper of their first community garden proposal. Jonathan had sat in the back with baby Emily on his lap, while Evelyn gave a speech that got a standing ovation. Those early years had felt like a fire. Not just passion, but purpose. She had buried that woman long ago, thinking the world had moved on without her. But now the fire had returned. The sun was just beginning to slide westward when Evelyn's new phone rang. She had just stepped out of the courthouse after filing the environmental exemption documents and was preparing to meet David Chen at his office. She didn't recognize the number, but she recognized the hesitation in the voice that answered. Mom? Evelyn stopped in her tracks, her grip tightening on the phone. Emily, she said flatly. There was a pause. I've been trying to reach you since yesterday. You didn't come home. Michael and I, we were worried. The lie was coated in sugar, but Evelyn had long since stopped mistaking sweetness for sincerity. You left me on the side of a dirt road with a suitcase, she replied. You didn't report me missing. You didn't call until now. Emily's voice faltered. That wasn't how it was supposed to happen. Michael got nervous. I panicked. You panicked, Evelyn repeated. You panicked and decided to abandon your 73-year-old mother after her husband's funeral? More silence. I made a mistake, Emily said quietly. I was angry. I thought you were going to fight us on the will. That's because it was forged, Evelyn snapped. You took advantage of a dying man who couldn't hold a spoon, much less a pen. Emily's voice hardened. We needed that money. The business is old, stale. Dad wouldn't adapt. This was a way forward. No, Evelyn said. It was a way out. For you, for Michael, at my expense. She could hear Emily exhale. Okay, look, we messed up, but I'm trying to fix this. If we sit down together, talk it out. There will be no talking, Evelyn interrupted. Only action. A beat. Mom, Emily said, shifting to her familiar patronizing tone, this isn't like you. You're not thinking clearly. But Evelyn was clearer than ever. Here's what's going to happen, she said, her voice like cold steel. You and Michael will sign a legal retraction of the will. You will acknowledge that the version you submitted was not your father's last wishes. Then you will walk away from the house, the business, and the land, permanently. Emily gasped. You're crazy. No, Evelyn said calmly. I'm prepared, and I haven't even played my best card yet. There was a long pause on the other end. Then, what are you talking about? Evelyn smiled, though no one could see it. You remember the wetlands behind the greenhouse? The swampy part? Emily asked, confused. It's a protected conservation site, Evelyn said. Jonathan and I registered it years ago with the State Environmental Board. Any attempt to commercially develop within 100 meters of that land is illegal, without a special exemption, which no developer in their right mind would approve. Emily's voice turned sharp. That's impossible. No, Evelyn said. It's documented, filed, public. And I've already spoken to the county's environmental compliance officer. Twist the knife gently, Evelyn thought. They'll be issuing a cease and desist to the mall developer tomorrow morning. Emily's breath hitched. And just so you understand the scale of your mistake, Evelyn added, Platinum Properties already has 2 pending lawsuits for similar violations in other counties. If they proceed here, I will gladly add Greenwood Village to that list. Silence. I've also spoken to Rebecca Martinez, Evelyn said. She's publishing an exposé, front page, with photographs including one of me standing on Maple Grove Road with the suitcase you packed. You wouldn't, Emily hissed. I would, Evelyn replied. And I am. Emily's tone turned desperate. Mom, please, think about the family, the legacy. You destroyed that, Evelyn said, voice rising for the first time. You tried to erase me. You buried me before you buried your father. Then what do you want? Emily finally asked. What would make you stop this? I told you, Evelyn said. You sign, you walk, you never set foot on my land again. And Michael? He'll do as he's told, Evelyn said coldly, or he'll face legal charges for theft and conspiracy. Another long pause. You've changed, Emily whispered, as if that were the true betrayal. No, Evelyn said. I've remembered who I was before I gave my whole life away. She hung up without another word. By the time Evelyn arrived at David's office, her plan was moving at full speed. I've never seen Emily rattled, David said, impressed, but her lawyer just called to request a meeting. She should be scared, Evelyn replied. I've backed her into a corner. David nodded. And what about Michael? He'll follow his sister. He always has. Just know this won't be the end of it, David warned. They'll regroup, maybe try another angle. I don't doubt it, Evelyn said, but I'm not afraid anymore. Let them come. Later that evening, as Evelyn sat on the back porch of the guest house she now temporarily called home, she looked out at the twilight sky. The garden center was quiet tonight, but in her mind she saw its future clearly. Vibrant rows of vegetables, children learning about compost, a community cafe in the old shed, and above all, a legacy not handed to the greedy but passed to the worthy. The board had been set. Her enemies had made their move. Now Evelyn Clark was playing to win. The town hall was packed. It wasn't an official court hearing, not yet, but word had spread like wildfire. Evelyn Clark Sullivan, long thought to be quietly fading into retirement, had issued a public challenge to her own children. She was going to confront them, in person, in front of the people who once bought seeds from her hand and learned how to prune roses from her workshops. The old community hall hadn't seen this much buzz since the Centennial Parade. David Chen stood beside Evelyn as the room filled. Reporters from the Greenwood Weekly and even a local affiliate from the state capitol sat in the front row. The mayor was present, arms crossed, watching everything unfold. And just behind him, in matching dark coats and nervous glances, were Emily and Brian. They hadn't been seen in public since the exposé hit the stands that morning. Headlines screamed, "Mother abandoned. Land war divides the Sullivan legacy." Underneath was a grainy photo of Evelyn standing on Maple Grove Road, suitcase at her feet, defiance in her eyes. David tapped the microphone. "Thank you all for coming. This is not a legal hearing, but a public statement and opportunity for truth. Mrs. Evelyn Clark Sullivan has something to say." Evelyn stepped forward, gripping the podium. "My name," she began, voice strong, "is Evelyn Clark. I helped build Sullivan's Garden Center from the ground up with my husband, Jonathan. I managed books, ordered soil, trained staff, and spent 40 years nurturing not just plants, but people, community, legacy." She paused, letting her words sink in. "And after my husband's death, I was abandoned, not just emotionally, but physically, left on a roadside by the very people I raised." A murmur ran through the crowd. Emily stood abruptly. "We made a mistake." "You committed fraud," Evelyn snapped. "You submitted a forged will to the court, removed me from the property I co-founded, and attempted to sell protected land to a commercial developer." Gasps now, even a few shouts. David stepped in. "The evidence has been submitted to the county court. The signature on the falsified will does not match Jonathan Sullivan's verified medical handwriting from the final month of his life. Because," Emily started again, but this time Brian, formerly Michael, the younger sibling with the gentler soul, rose slowly beside her. "Don't," she whispered to him, grabbing his wrist. "Not here." He looked at her, then at Evelyn, then at the sea of faces. "I have something to say," he said, and the room went silent. "My real name is Brian Sullivan. I've always hated the Michael thing Emily made me go by. Said it was more professional. But that's not the point." He turned to Evelyn. "Mom, I forged the signature. Emily told me to." The air left the room. David turned toward him. "Are you saying, under oath, that the will submitted to probate court was knowingly falsified?" "Yes," Brian said, voice shaking. "Emily said we'd lose everything if we didn't act fast, that Dad didn't know what he was doing in the end. She gave me a sample of his old signature, and I copied it." Emily turned to him in disbelief. "You said you'd never—" "I lied," he said, "like you told me to." Evelyn felt her knees buckle, but she held herself upright, hands gripping the edges of the podium. "I wasn't going to say anything," Brian went on. "I was going to let it pass. But when I saw what you did to Mom, when I saw that picture, I couldn't do it anymore." Evelyn's eyes met his, and for the first time in weeks, maybe months, she saw the boy she once raised. David raised a document. "We are submitting formal charges for elder abuse, financial fraud, and falsification of legal documents. We're also requesting a court injunction blocking either sibling from accessing the business, residence, or assets." Emily's face drained of color. "You can't do this," she hissed. "You already did," Evelyn replied, voice low and even. A silence followed, heavy, final. Then Evelyn said, louder this time, "I have one more condition." David raised an eyebrow. "You sign everything back," Evelyn said. "Today. The business, the deed, the house. You both sign legal transfer of all assets to me, or we go to full criminal trial." Emily looked around, at the mayor, the reporters, the furious stares of former neighbors and friends. She knew it was over. "You'll ruin us," she whispered. "No," Evelyn said. "You ruined yourselves." Brian stepped forward. "I'll sign." Evelyn nodded. "And you will testify." He nodded back, ashamed. Emily stood frozen. Then finally, without a word, she turned and walked out of the hall. But no one followed her. Silence followed the dramatic confrontation in the hall. Emily had fled. Brian, pale and shivering, stood beside Evelyn, his shoulders sagging with relief and shame. The audience stared, some stunned, some shaking their heads as cell phones recorded every moment. "Before we move forward," Evelyn said, voice calm and measured, "I need to make something absolutely clear." She turned her gaze to Brian, then swept the room. "Effective immediately, I am severing all familial legal ties. Emily and Brian Carter are no longer my heirs, nor do they bear any claim to me, emotionally, legally, or otherwise." A gasp erupted. Brian winced but said nothing. Evelyn continued, "This isn't done in anger, it's done in clarity. What they've done, their actions, were not mistakes. They were choices, deliberate, calculated. I will not allow their betrayal to continue to taint what Jonathan and I built." She looked at them one final time. "This is the reckoning. You are no longer family. Only adversaries will follow." The reporters swarmed. Within hours, the story was picked up by multiple state-level news outlets. The Willow Creek Herald splashed a bold headline across its website: "Woman cuts off children after shocking exposure of fraud." Another outlet, the State Tribune, ran, "Old woman becomes symbol of resistance against elder exploitation." A news anchor's voice crackled on Evelyn's borrowed radio later that afternoon. In a stunning turn of events, 71-year-old Evelyn Carter, once thought penniless, emerged victorious today after proving her children plotted and executed a fraudulent will. She's now the state's leading advocate in the fight against elder financial abuse. Her cell phone buzzed. Governor's office? State Attorney General? Calls poured in from media personalities, senior advocacy groups, and legal professionals. But one call surprised her most. It was from the director of the State Elder Justice Task Force, a newly formed group dedicated to preventing financial abuse of older citizens. "Ms. Carter," said the director, "your case has already become emblematic. We'd like to appoint you as our official spokesperson on elder asset protection. Will you accept?" Evelyn stared at the phone, the weight of her journey crashing over her. Grief, betrayal, rage, clarity, triumph. "I'd be honored." As word spread, television crews and radio producers asked for her insight. Local community centers invited her to speak. Advocacy groups tagged her in their posts. People saw her not only as a symbol of justice reclaimed, but as a beacon of hope. Over the next few days, Evelyn sat for an interview with State Weekly News. The reporter asked, "What's the message you want older people everywhere to hear?" Evelyn paused before answering, "That no one underestimates you and lives to get away with it. Age isn't vulnerability, it's wisdom, and the law should protect the bright and experienced, not prey on them." As the interviews continued, Evelyn realized something more profound. She wasn't simply fighting for herself. She was fighting for anyone vulnerable to similar betrayal. Back at her rebuilt garden center, friends and former apprentices brought tea and offered quiet praise. Among them was a young lawyer volunteer who said, "Your story changed how we train law students for elder protection cases." A radio host asked her to co-create a weekly segment on seniors' rights. The mayor invited her to open the first senior safety forum in Willow Creek as keynote speaker. In the weeks that followed, Evelyn's image, sturdy, gray-haired, unbowed, appeared in campaign flyers for elder justice legislation. Policymakers quoted her in committee hearings. Lobbyists for senior safeguards used her name as illustrative of what law should protect. And through it all, Evelyn stayed focused. She yet admitted to herself one truth. She never wished to be in this position. This was never about fame or politics. It was about refusing to be erased, about demanding respect for those who built lives, raised families, and nurtured communities. One evening, as the stars lit her porch, she reflected quietly, "They thought they could bury me on a country road. Instead, they turned me into a protector, a symbol, a force that stood for something bigger than myself or my loss. Justice had been served, but the real victory was the promise of protection for others in their golden years, that they too would have a voice. The morning light filtered through the dusty windows of the greenhouse. For the first time in months, the center felt alive, not just with the hum of electricity or the scent of fresh soil, but with purpose. Evelyn stood at the main entrance, sleeves rolled, hands dirty with compost. Behind her, 2 teenage boys wheeled in a cart of seedlings, arguing cheerfully over which rows should go to kale and which to tomatoes. She smiled. The garden center had always been a place of growth, not just for plants, but for people. Now she was giving it back to the town that had stood beside her, not in blood, but in loyalty. She'd renamed it the Clark Sullivan Community Garden and Learning Center. It wasn't a business anymore. It was a foundation, fully funded by the state grant she received after her appointment as Elder Asset Protection Ambassador, along with private donations that poured in following her viral story. More importantly, it was a school. She had opened 3 apprenticeship spots for local youth every season, teaching them everything from soil chemistry to irrigation systems. And today they were launching the Jonathan Sullivan Agricultural Scholarship Fund, a full-ride award for any Greenwood youth who wanted to study agriculture, horticulture, or environmental sciences. David Chen stood beside her, reading over the final legal paperwork. "You've done something remarkable here, Evelyn," he said. "Most people would have left after all that." Evelyn shook her head. "I didn't stay to prove them wrong. I stayed to build something they never could." As she oversaw the planting of a new herb garden section, she spotted a girl on her knees by the lavender rose, carefully replanting shoots. Petite frame, dark hair tied in a bandana, quiet but focused. That was Ruby, one of the newer apprentices. She was 15, thoughtful, always asking about root systems or mulch acidity. But Evelyn had never pried into her background. Most of the kids came from broken homes or low-income families. She only asked for commitment, curiosity, and kindness. Later that afternoon, while reviewing the greenhouse temperature logs, Ruby knocked gently on her office door. "Mrs. Evelyn," she said, "do you have a minute?" Evelyn looked up. "Of course." Ruby hesitated, fidgeting. I found something last night, and I wanted to ask you about it." She handed Evelyn an old photograph, faded and folded, of 2 young women in overalls, arms slung around each other, laughing with dirt on their faces. Evelyn froze. That was her. And the woman beside her, the one with freckles and wild curls, was Marla. "My mother," Ruby said quietly, "she passed away when I was 6, but she told me stories about you." The room was suddenly very still. Evelyn swallowed. "She told you my name?" "She said you were the love of her life, that you were young and scared and didn't know if the world would accept 2 women trying to start a life together on a patch of farmland, but that you taught her how to grow things, how to believe." Evelyn stared at the photo, memories unraveling like thread. Late nights talking under stars, planting lavender in the rain, whispering dreams in secret. She had loved Marla deeply. But in the 1970s, love between 2 women in a farming town was unthinkable. They had parted with pain, promising to never mention it again. She thought that chapter had been buried forever. "She never told me your full name," Ruby said, "until I found this photo in her diary. When I saw your face on the news last month, I knew." Evelyn's heart clenched. "You're her daughter?" Ruby nodded. "Adopted later by another family, but yes." Evelyn exhaled. "I didn't know she had a child." "She always said she wanted to start a garden center again, just like the one you dreamed about." Evelyn reached across the desk and took Ruby's hand. "You're not just welcome here," she said softly. "You're home." In that moment, Evelyn felt something shift, deeper than justice, beyond vengeance. It was legacy, returning not through bloodlines, but through spirit, purpose, and memory. She had lost children, but gained something far more powerful. The summer sun bore down heavily on Greenwood, but the warmth in Evelyn's greenhouse remained gentle and steady, like the peace she had found in the past months. She had no expectations that the past would ever circle back, but as the old gate creaked open one morning, two shadows appeared at the edge of the gravel path, Emily and Brian. Gone were their polished clothes and practiced confidence. Brian wore a wrinkled shirt, and Emily's hair was pulled into a loose, unbrushed knot. Their eyes, once defiant, now avoided direct contact. Evelyn watched them approach, her hands still dirtied from planting rosemary. They stood at the threshold of her garden like ghosts. Emily spoke first. We lost everything, she said. The courts froze our accounts. Investors pulled out. Brian had to sell the house. Evelyn nodded but said nothing. Brian tried to smile, but it faded too quickly. I'm working at a friend's hardware store, part-time. Emily's staying with an aunt. We came to apologize, Emily added. Not because we want anything, just to say it. Evelyn studied them in silence. There was sincerity in their exhaustion, the kind only failure could forge. I don't want your forgiveness, Emily continued, voice trembling. I just wanted you to know that I regret it. Everything, every lie. Brian nodded beside her. Me too. I never should have touched that will. I was scared, but that's no excuse. The wind rustled the rosemary leaves. Somewhere in the distance, a wind chime rang. Evelyn turned and walked into the small garden shed. When she returned, she held two envelopes, both yellowed with age and sealed with her husband's initials, J.S. She held one out to each of them. Your father wrote these letters, she said, months before he passed. He asked me to give them to you only when I felt the time was right. Brian stared at the envelope in his hands. Did he know what we were planning? Evelyn's eyes softened, but only slightly. Your father always knew more than he let on. They sat on the porch steps. The sun cast long shadows as they opened the envelopes. Inside were handwritten pages, Jonathan's unmistakable script. Evelyn didn't need to read them again. She had memorized every word the first time. Brian's eyes moved over the words slowly. His lips trembled. Emily, at first stoic, began to shake. Her face turned pale, then tears. Silent at first. Then, for Emily, uncontrollable. Because the letters were not filled with forgiveness. They were filled with finality. Jonathan hadn't written them to bridge a rift. He had written them to close a door. To Emily, he had written, You were born fierce, my daughter. You had your mother's stubbornness and my fire. But somewhere along the way, you turned that fire into something cold and hungry. You believed the world owed you more than what love alone could offer. Alone, and I watched you begin to take without asking. That broke me more than the cancer ever did. If you're reading this, I'm gone. And I ask you only one thing. Do not come back for what you've already thrown away. To Brian, he had written, You followed, even when you knew it was wrong. I remember when you were 5, and you stole a candy bar because your sister dared you. You cried for a week. I forgave you then because you were a child, but now you are grown. And still, you followed. You forged my name with the same hand I once taught to hold a pencil. That will never leave me. I loved you both, but I don't recognize who you've become. No demands, no lectures, just a quiet, permanent goodbye. When they finished, Evelyn stood in the doorway. I have no more words for you, she said. Your father said what needed to be said, and unlike you, he never broke his promises. Emily stood, shaky and silent. Brian folded his letter with trembling fingers. They didn't beg. They didn't ask for a second chance, because they finally understood. It was over. They turned and walked away, their figures shrinking down the gravel path until they vanished through the same gate they once thought they owned. Evelyn remained on the porch, alone but not lonely. Because sometimes peace isn't born from forgiveness. It's born from closure. The early morning light streamed through the greenhouse panes, casting a golden glow across the rows of vibrant seedlings. Tiny hands carefully pricked out baby tomato plants in one corner, while frail elderly fingers gently pressed marigold seeds into the soil in another. Laughter mingled with the hum of watering cans and soft voices practicing plant names. Welcome to the first of many Seeds of Hope workshops at the Clark Sullivan Community Garden and Learning Center. Evelyn stood near the doorway, watching the scene with a full heart. She wore her favorite faded denim work shirt over her blouses, sleeves rolled up, hands dusted with soil. At 71, she moved with the grace of one who had spent a lifetime helping things grow. She caught a whisper between two volunteers. "Look at her. She's leading this after everything she's been through." Another nodded. "She's reborn." This workshop wasn't about her. It was about the ripple she had created. Young and old planted together, sharing stories and teaching each other as much as the plants taught them patience and resilience. A reporter whispered over the side of a camera setup, "We'll call this The Woman Who Replanted a Family." Fitting, right? "That's an excellent title," replied the filmmaker, adjusting the lens. Over the past weeks, crews had visited for a documentary titled The Woman Who Replanted Her Family. The title was layered, about Evelyn rebuilding what had been broken, but also about how she'd grown a new community when the old one had withered. At noon, the workshop paused for refreshments under shade cloth. Kids ran through activities, while elders sipped lemonade and admired the kids they once were. Evelyn joined them, sitting at a long wooden picnic table, the smell of fresh basil and mint wafting through the air. "I never imagined I'd be here like this," she began gently. "Not after what I've lost. But the thing about seeds is, they bury themselves where you plant them. Some bloom right away, others take time, but they all find a way." The crowd nodded, silent with emotion. The documentary crew filmed the scene, capturing the little group as Evelyn paused to gently place her hand on a young girl's shoulder. "Everything that's dead," she said softly to the camera, "can be made alive again." The girl turned, eyes shining. "Like us?" "Yes," Evelyn smiled. "Like us." Days turned into weeks, and the greenhouse workshops became a weekly tradition. Regional media stations featured short segments, morning show hosts sipping coffee and praising Evelyn's work. Quotes like, "An icon of second chances" and "Proof that age brings wisdom, not weakness" became common. One afternoon, as the children helped water the sunflower beds, Evelyn noticed a local teacher filming the kids. The teacher waved her over. "You have to see this," he said softly. On his tablet, a short sequence showed a child teaching a grandparent to identify a plant, reversing an expected role with warmth and humor. "That's beautiful," Evelyn whispered. "It's more than that," the teacher said. "It's what you've created, a space where generations meet and learn. It's proof that community heals." That evening, back on her porch under twinkling string lights, Evelyn allowed herself a moment to breathe. From the outside, it looked like quiet progress, but inside her chest, her heart felt like it was redrawing its rhythms piece by piece, shock fading into purpose, purpose growing into joy. She remembered the dusty road where she'd been dropped, the cold realization of betrayal, the fury that rebuilt her, and over all of it, the sweet, defiant lines she'd spoken, the first spark of reclaiming herself. "I wasn't lost. I was free." Now she was exactly that, a woman free, nurturing a new generation. The The documentary premiered that night, hosted outdoors next to the greenhouse. Folding chairs were set up, and the audience soon filled with townspeople, children, volunteers, and former customers. As the film started, the opening scene showed Evelyn standing alone beside the dusty road, suitcase in hand. Her face was tired, but resolute. The narrator's voice said, abandoned by her children, betrayed by legacy, forgotten by family. Yet in the quietest place, a seed was planted. As the film followed her journey, tears and gasps echoed among the audience. But what struck them most was not the sorrow, it was the transformation. They watched scenes of her calling lawyers and environmental officers, the legal battles, media coverage, the heartbreaking confrontation, and the letters. But most of all, they watched the greenhouse bloom again. Kids and grandparents sowing seeds together, letters from strangers thanking her for giving them back their own mothers, fathers, grandparents. When it ended, silence ruled, followed by applause so strong the hall shook. Evelyn waddled to her feet, tears rolling unashamedly down her cheeks. She raised her hand and waved. They clapped harder. Someone yelled, "You showed us how to grow again!" Drenched in newfound hope, the community lifted her up, not as a defeated widow, but as a beacon, the gardener who rebirthed a family beyond blood. And she stood there on the edge of it all. A 71-year-old woman with muddy hands and an unbreakable spirit, finally understanding that some seasons are meant not just for surviving, but for sowing. The morning mist had just lifted when Evelyn climbed onto the familiar rocking chair on her front porch. Jonathan's old chair, the one that creaked like a memory. In its worn wood, she could still feel the warmth of his hand, the way he'd rest there after long days tending seedlings, watching her plant and plan. She nestled into its grooves as the first rays of sun struck the greenhouse beyond. Through the window, a young sprout peeked from the soil, tiny leaves tentative, reaching toward light. A new generation of life, green and hopeful. All those years, she thought she was broken, discarded, weak. But here she understood something truer. Healing isn't linear. It's messy. It's uneven. And sometimes you don't know what you're made of until you've lost everything. Evelyn inhaled the scent of fresh soil and morning dew, that familiar earthy tang that felt like resilience. The garden was awake, birds flitting between basil and rosemary, bees busy at the lavender, and the occasional distant murmur of children's voices starting their day. She leaned forward, elbows on her knees, hands wrapped around the wood arms. The garden was alive. She was alive. A voice, soft but resolute, came to her lips like a breath she'd held for years. Sometimes you have to lose everything to know what you truly have. She didn't know whether it was advice or revelation, but it felt essential, honest. A message not just to others, but to her, to the years she could have given up, to the dust she left on that dirt road, to every harsh word she suppressed, every tear she refused to waste. Evelyn closed her eyes. Beneath the peace, something stirred, something steady, sure. A confidence she hadn't realized returned. She wasn't victim anymore. She was... what? A survivor? A fighter? A teacher? None of it fit. She thought of the newspaper headline, "Woman Who Replanted Her Family," the documentaries calling her an icon or a beacon. She'd been honored by the state, her story shared in classrooms. Senior centers had reprinted her quotes, "Age is wisdom, not weakness." But what she felt sitting in that rocking chair was something more subtle. She was a symbol of self-ownership, of dignity not given but earned, of the power in knowing you can still rise when the ground beneath you disappears. Her phone buzzed with a message from Julia Kim, the young farmer running a local food cooperative. "You are hosting our monthly talk next week. Kids are asking, what's it like to start over? Any suggestions?" Evelyn smiled at the screen. She tapped back. "Tell them, they're never too old to be the seed." Then she closed the phone. In the greenhouse, the sprout shimmered. Down on her apron, dirt smudged her fingers. That spray of green was more than a plant. It was promise. But even symbols grow. Later that afternoon, a small group of reporters came by with cameras and lights, coaxing her to speak for one more final segment as part of the documentary release. They asked, "Mrs. Carter, your stories inspired so many. How would you summarize what you've discovered through all this?" She studied them. Beyond questions, beyond cameras. And she answered simply, "I discovered that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers, 'Get up, tend your ground.' And that whisper is enough." The interviewer, deft, turned. "You've become an icon of personal sovereignty for seniors worldwide. How does that feel?" Evelyn paused. Icon. That was a big word. She thought of her century-old rocking chair, worn and imperfect, yet unbroken. She thought of the seedlings reaching towards sun, stubborn and alive. She said quietly, "I don't want to be a symbol of suffering. I want to be a symbol of knowing your own power, no matter the age." And that made the headlines the next morning. Not a symbol of suffering, but empowerment. Woman who lost house, children, stability. Now teach thousands to stand on their own soil. As the seasons changed, Evelyn continued to teach. Her workshops turned into mentorships. Her garden became a living classroom. Students learned to plant and heal. And every so often, a former skeptic, someone who had once doubted an old woman's drive, asked, "How do you keep going?" And Evelyn would lean forward, plant-worn hands resting on a seed packet, then reply, "You keep going because the ground remembers your footsteps, and every footprint you make helps the next seed find its way." One evening, as twilight settled behind the greenhouse, Evelyn closed up the center and walked to the rocking chair again. With a small sigh, she sat, looking out at the rows of young tomato vines, marigolds, and lavender. Fireflies flickered to life among the green. She rested her hand over her heart. Loss is a thief. Pain can bury you. But hope? Hope is a garden waiting to be planted. If you nurture it with patience and courage, no one can steal it again. And sometimes, having lost everything, you realize the greatest gift was knowing what you still held.